The relationship between ideas grows more complex. So should the transitions. So these images of railroad tracks are a visual metaphor for this. Like if you just have two ideas that are coming together, that's a fairly simple transition. But what if lots of ideas are coming together? That's complex. So, in writing, this can play out like this, right? If you have like an obvious relationship between two ideas, you don't even need a transition. Like, we talk like this all the time. I really like the climate in San Francisco. Seattle's too cold and rainy for me. There's an implicit contrast in here, like but we don't really need to say it because it's fairly obvious. We need to reschedule. Something came up in our end. There's an implicit sort of because in here, but again, people can kind of figure this stuff out. If in writing we have a fairly obvious relationship, then usually a single word is sufficient, right? Men tend to find large lips when appealing because such lips indicate high estrogen levels. Or North Americans find suntans attractive according to survey data. However, East Asians report a general preference for pale skin. These little transitions here help signal the relationship between ideas that may be obvious to us, but not necessarily obvious to readers. But as ideas become more complex, then we start seeing almost like a phrase level transition, like some of these examples here. Another instance where Kanazawa overgeneralizes the results of a study is. This is complicated. I'm reminding you that, Kanazawa overgeneralized in the last example, and now I'm going to tell you another example, but it's also about overgeneralization. So I'm going to kind of signal that as I move from one idea to the next. Here I'm setting up a kind of a fairly complicated contrast here, and I kind of want to remind you, what the last bit was all about, and help you see how it's different from the next one. And here, the cause-effect relationship is fairly complicated. So we need to do a little bit more than because we need to kind of, elaborate on the nature of the cause. But what if we're moving between whole clusters of ideas? And you see this a lot in essays. So let's say you've got an outline for an essay like this: causes and effects of beauty bias. And I'm going to tell you 3 causes, and I'm going to tell you 3 effects. Well, when I move from causes to effects, that's pretty huge, right? That's almost like a major turning point in the essay. And such a transition requires really more than a word, and probably more than a phrase. Why not give it its own paragraph? And that's what this example from an R4B essay is all about. This came from an essay that basically was trying to say that our preferences used to be adaptive, but now they're maladaptive. And the writer had sort of 3 examples, pretty faces, tools, which kind of came in the form of things like kind of craftsmanship. And he was talking about things like jewelry and how we're attracted to, kind of well-made objects. He talked about sugar, fatty food and things like that. And then, kind of went and showed how these things are maladaptive today, right? Like we overspend on jewelry, we get plastic surgery and obsess over our faces, we overeat. And this was a transition paragraph that sort of slotted in between these 2 clusters of ideas. Now, if you look at this paragraph, you'll notice that it actually follows a formula. And this is a formula that we can replicate, all right? There's really 3 things happening here. You've got, first, you have a sentence that kind of sums up what the previous cluster of ideas was all about, right? So all that stuff about tools and faces and sugar, well, that's really about how these evolutionary needs were once useful for survival and reproduction. And then you get something that's kind of like reflective or reacting to that, it's kind of inevitable that things are going to be different. And then you get a sort of a summary of what the next cluster of ideas is going to be all about. Now I'm going to kind of get into how these things are maladaptive. Let's look at some other examples of transition paragraphs from R4B writers and see if we can put them in order so they follow this formula.